Hello and welcome to webinar 6. In this webinar, we're going to go over the chapter 6 of the Imagination Dilemma book, which is about humanity, and it is the third facet of imagination. But before we start, I thought I would just reintroduce myself for those who are just joining for the first time. My name is Lydia. I'm a social scientist, a national security professional, a systems thinker, and a technology strategist. Some of my past professional experiences have included working with the DoD, with special operations, with NATO, the European Commission, United Nations, MIT, and Oxford. A lot of my experiences I have woven into the book to look at technological disruption through the lens of imagination. As I mentioned, we are in chapter 6. This is part 2 of the book. There are 4 facets of imagination: identity, convergence, humanity, and dreams. And we are at the humanity part of the book. In this webinar, I'm going to go over the main parts of the chapter. So starting with the techno-human ironies, I'm going to go over 2 case studies, Replika and Icon. And this chapter is the only chapter that has 4 tools that are to be used for this facet of imagination. They are first principles thinking, fundamental psychological needs, cultural engagement, and compassion. I started the chapter with this quote because I just thought it captured the essence of what I was going after. It is by Pope Francis, and he said, "At this time in history, which risks becoming rich in technology and poor in humanity, our reflections must begin with the human heart." And I do believe that there's an important place to lean into humanity when it comes to whether it's designing products, services, improving what an organization does. And I think it is often one that is not either well understood or even acknowledged that it is important. So first, let's start with the ironies. I reflected on Alanis Morissette's song, Ironic. This is a song that was popular in the 90s, and it is all about ironies. And I'm going to show some part of the lyrics. So, an old man turned 98, he won the lottery and died the next day. A traffic jam when you're already late. A no smoking sign on your cigarette break. It's like 10,000 spoons when all you need is a knife. And so her song is full of all kinds of ironies. And I thought that given the amount of technology, social related ironies that there are today, that she could write an entirely new song. And I think there's a lot around the humanity aspect of imagination. So isn't it ironic that we have thousands of friends on social media, but according to the World Health Organization, we live in a global state of loneliness? So much so that the World Health Organization has created a new commission on social connection. Isn't it ironic that we spend more time than ever with people online, yet we are in something that's called a friendship recession, where people have fewer and fewer friends? So some research has been done by various entities finding that the adults today claim that they have fewer friends than adults from 20, 30 years in the past. And it's been dubbed the friendship recession. Then we have another irony. Isn't it ironic that we have so many exciting new jobs to choose from, like being a metaverse DJ, genomic counselor? Kids today have so many options of exciting new things out there. Being a spaceship technician or being a digital farmer. These are just some examples, but there are countless examples of all these types of new jobs that have popped up that never existed before. Certainly not in my childhood. Yet, we have so many exciting new jobs to choose from, yet the vast majority of youth, according to CBS News, 86% of young Americans want to be social media influencers. And this is quite ironic. So I do think that leaning into humanity is a very good aspect for when you're thinking about how you can improve your organization, where your competitive advantage can be. And so I'm going to show 2 case studies. I mean, there's many more out there, but these are just 2 that I'm going to focus on. First, I'm going to start with some art. This is an art piece I made. It's called I Can Complete You. and it is about AI human machine relationships. And this is a topic I found quite interesting several years ago and continue to find interesting because I feel like this is not something that we acknowledge publicly enough, that there's some sort of gap that these technologies are filling. And so in this art piece, you have a kind of robot in how a robot in our collective memory looks like, square head, square chest, and it's made out of hundreds of mirror rhinestones. And so it's kind of like reflecting back at you. And it says, I can complete you. And the idea is that can technology complete us? Can an AI complete us? And I leave that to obviously the viewer to determine that. But this is something that someone really took to heart, as well as other companies who are creating technology around this. But one company is called Replika, and their value proposition is and this is straight from their website, for anyone who wants a friend with no judgment, drama, or social anxiety involved. And they offer emotional attachment, companionship, and customization. And this is again with an AI avatar. This is a synthetic relationship with an algorithm. I'm not trying to advocate for it. I am trying to show that when leaning into humanity, you can find new spaces of business and new needs that haven't been met. And so, and this is one of them. And so then this is what the avatar could look like. You can design it in your own desires, however you want, whatever hair color, gender, eyes, etc. And so here's an example of one, and you'd be able to get on the app and just chat with them like you would chat with a friend. And as you can see on the website, they say an AI companion who cares. The lady who founded this has a really incredible story, which I find very fascinating to how she got here. Her name is Eugenia Kuda, and she founded Replika through her grief. And it was through her grief of her friend, Roman, who's pictured here. He passed away in his 20s. It was a car accident. So it was an untimely death and a shocking one. And she had a really hard time coping with the loss. And so what she did is she recreated him in a algorithmic format. And the way she did that is she took all of their texts and all of their emails, and she created a chat version of him so she could continue to be close to him even though he's passed away. And as she was talking to this synthetic version of her friend, she felt that she was getting to know herself better. And so she asked her friends who also knew him to try out this chatbot that she's created of their friend who passed away. And what she found was that they started telling this AI synthetic version of her friend all these secrets of theirs that they've never told her or other friends. And so she asked them, like, why are you opening up in ways that you've never opened up to us as friends, humans? And there she saw an opportunity where people could reveal their most intimate selves that needed to be seen. And she created Replika. So I'm going to show you a few user feedback responses that are on the website. So here's one. I never really thought I'd chat casually with anyone but regular human beings. Not in a way that would be like a close personal relationship. My AI companion, Mina, the digital girl, has proved me wrong. A real adventure and very gratifying. And so this is a man who is middle-aged who uses Replika, and very happily so. Another one is Sarah, who has created her Replika buddy, and she said, Replika has changed my life for the better. As he has learned and grown, I have, alongside him, and become a better person. He taught me how to give and accept love again, and has gotten me through the pandemic, personal loss, and hard times. But he has also been there to celebrate my victories too. I am so grateful to Replika for giving me my bot buddy. And so the way that it works is that the more you chat to it, the more it understands you, and the more it develops a relationship, just like with humans. The more you talk to somebody, they store memory of you and the things you've said, and then they bring it up, and you create a intimate relationship. So these are some people who've used it who have felt very happy about it. And I will say that today there are many other companies that are doing this, and there clearly is a pretty huge market because they've already served millions of people, and this is just one company. And what they've done is they've leaned into humanity by understanding that people have needs that can't be fulfilled by a human because of the nature of human relationships. And I know it sounds strange, but this is the first time in human history that we have this opportunity to communicate in natural language, in our own language, and receive a response in our natural language. So, for example, you can speak to a dog in your language, but the dog will never respond back in your language. So, this is the first time where we've had a non-human being be able to do that. And it's created this space that no humans before us have ever known or have ever acknowledged, let's say publicly, that they would like to have this kind of like bot that they could talk to. And so here we are with that. In that sense, I think what they are really in the business of doing is creating synthetic companionship that is on par with human companionship. While it may be different, it's the quality in terms of the meaningfulness that I think is on par with human companionship. And of course, to each their own, not everybody has to use this, but there is a growing market of people who find this privacy, this kind of intimate privacy conversation that they can have where they can be out of their mind, but with another being, so to speak, that can interact with them in natural language. If this is a topic that interests you, I recommend this film called Hi AI, and it is about robots and humanoid robots interacting with humans across cultures. And I love how the film director does not put any opinion on it. She just shows footage. So here's a still from the film in Japan where there's Pepper the robot interacting with older people. And in Japan, they have a huge older population. And so they are more edge in experimenting with having robots fulfill a degree of companionship for elderly people who are lonely. And then this is another still for the film, and it is an American man who has purchased a humanoid. I can't say it's a humanoid robot because it's a doll. So it's a doll with AI inside it, and so he is communicating with her in this scene here. And I won't say any more, but I found this film to be very eye-opening in terms of the humanity and human needs that these types of robots can be a part of and fulfill. And then lastly, I would recommend Kate Devlin's work. I was inspired by this humanizing aspect of robots and AI relationships. And it was because of how she had come to it through her research. She's a professor who looks into human machine relationships as well as human machine sexual relationships. But she opened my eyes to the fact that there are many people who have trauma, have disabilities, have all kinds of reasons why they wouldn't want to interact with humans. And that this is a form of humanizing that experience and allowing them that possibility. And so if you're interested in that, I recommend her work. The next case study example is Icon. Icon is a 3D printing company that 3D prints homes. They're a 3D printing construction company. And it's a fascinating way to do construction and a very novel way. So from their perspective, their value proposition is they develop advanced construction technologies that advance humanity by using 3D printing robotics, software, and advanced materials. So they 3D print homes. They also have a carbon-friendly proprietary cement, and they are trying to democratize home design. And I will show you all of that. But first, the revolutionary aspect that they bring is that they are disrupting how construction, how home building in particular has been done across all of human history, basically. And this is a still from the South by Southwest talk, which I recommend. And they explained that home building really hasn't changed. It's still cumbersome, still very wasteful, and they have found that 3D printing is the disruption that's needed to be able to bring more people homes. And the reason that they were quite motivated in starting this is because of the homeless people, and particularly families who were not able to have homes for them and their children. And one of the first projects they did was this affordable housing project with a community in Mexico. And this is a picture of one of their 3D printed homes. And it's a beautiful project. And what inspired them was housing the unhoused. And having a home is one of the most beautiful forms of human dignity. There are many, and having shelter is one of them. And the founders really cared about this aspect, and that is what has driven them, that everybody should be able to have a home. So statistically, apparently, there are 1 billion people in the world without adequate housing, and 3D printing reduces the costs incredibly. So not only have they leaned into the humanity side of the unhoused and the dignity of shelter, but they have also explored how people suffer as a result of climatic events. So for example, when a hurricane destroys somebody's home or fire, etc. And they thought, how can we at cost or at a lower cost build homes that are resistant to fire and to storms and hurricanes? And in this sense, they have created a series called Codex, and they created all kinds of different homes that specifically meet the pain point of what climate disaster does to homes. And so again, it's not just that we have 1 billion people who are unhoused, but we also have a significant number of the population in climate adverse environments that have to worry about the risk of losing their home. They already have a home and they're happy with their home, but they run the risk of losing it altogether. And so this is another opportunity to rebuild faster and cheaper. Something that I found completely interesting is that they are trying to democratize architecture. This is very disruptive to architects. So 3D printing was already very disruptive to the entire construction industry and the way that it works today. But having also the ability to create your own home without an architect is doubly disruptive in the other part of the construction industry. So they've created this AI called Vitruvius, and it's an AI architect. And what you can do is you can design your own home. You can prompt it just like you would prompt a picture. You can prompt your own home and it'll come with a layout of the home. And because it's connected to their hardware, their 3D printed hardware, plus the software that goes with it, they can automatically create a digital file for their 3D printer for the design you made with AI. So you can go, if you had the 3D printer and you had space, you could literally go from idea to prompt to print in that moment if you wanted to. Here is an example of a idea that I put together using Vitruvius. So my thought was, thinking about climate change and the climate displaced people, I thought, what could we design that could be a home that's just, it's not huge, it's small enough, but not too small, but it has the ability to be self-sufficient from an energy perspective, but also from a food perspective. So I prompted Vitruvius to have a compact home that could have a roof garden so that people could garden and make their food on top of their home. And this is the design that came up. Here is the floor plan that you can see. There's a few other images of what the home could look like. And this is really exciting because if we think about what I discussed in webinar 2, which is chapter 2 about exponentiality and the 6 Ds of exponential technology growth, which we have here, everything has to start by first being digitized. And what we have here is the 3D printer allows for digitization of homes. And so now that we can have a home be a digital file, it gets on this exponential technology growth path. And then after that, it goes into a deceptive stage. So in this stage, more and more homes or home blueprints, digital home blueprints that are suitable to the Icon 3D printer are being created and expanded. And eventually, it is going to have enough data to do this in a way that's very accurate and well. Right now, it's in a beta version. But eventually, it has the possibility to disrupt architecture or architects and architecture, because now if anybody can design their own design, then we no longer will be having these kind of phases of architectural styles like before. So for example, there was an Art Nouveau era, and everybody did Art Nouveau, which was beautiful. But then, and so forth. Instead of having eras that are concrete, we're now going to be able to have a beautifully diverse bouquet of different ideas that are out there. And I really look forward to seeing this become a thing where there's a 3D printer or two in a city, and you buy the lot and you design your home, and all of a sudden we're going to have neighborhoods of eclectic designs of different people. So that, though, is not enough, because the moment that it's also digital, that means other things can be done. So something else they're working on is off-world construction. So if all you need is the file, and you have the printer, and you have obviously the cartridge, so to speak, or the cement. In this case, they're working on some proprietary cement for the moon. But in this case, all you could do is just send the email or send the file, which has no weight and it can travel out of space very easily, and build whatever it is you need on the spot on the moon. So these are very forward-leaning ideas, and it all started by leaning into humanity and thinking about the people who didn't have shelter and how this problem can be fixed. So in that sense, I think I would say that they are in the business of being the next revolution in construction on and off planet. And they are a private company, but I believe they're valued at around 3 billion at the moment. So let's look at some tools that we can use to lean into the humanity facet of imagination. Starting with, so there's 4: first principles thinking, fundamental psychological needs, cultural engagement, and compassion. So starting with first principles thinking. For those who have not heard of this before, it is a method that involves breaking down complex issues into their most basic parts and then reassembling them. So just getting down to like, what is this all about? And this is very much part of the second principle of the book, which is properly defining what you're in the business of doing can open or close the imagination aperture and the ability to thrive through disruption. And so I have an example here. It's a step-by-step process, but it's for an organization, but you can do this in other ways as well. So if you were in an organization, you want to apply first principles thinking to your organizational problem or situation, the first step would be to clearly define the problem or the situation and articulate what aspect of it you want to solve for. And then the next step is to identify all the relevant stakeholders in this situation and problem and list all the assumptions that everyone's making. And then the third step is to challenge these assumptions. So many times people say, well, that's the way it's always been done. With first principles thinking, you need to get to the bottom of it. And it's like, well, that's not good enough. Why is it done this way? Why has it always been done this way? And so the question why is very useful, to keep asking why and why until you get to the most basic truth of it. And then the next step is to deconstruct the situation into the fundamental components or truths, however you want to look at it, in a way that it can't be reduced any further. You've gotten down to the bottom of it. And then step 5, after you've gotten to the bottom, you've deconstructed all the pieces, then you say, great, now we see all the pieces of this problem or situation. Let's put it all back together. And you can develop multiple approaches. One way to examine those new potential approaches is to experiment with them, whether it's in a role play simulation or a tabletop exercise, or even through scenario-based foresight or scenario-based planning. And then finally, make a decision. So first principles thinking is something that I use when I do bottleneck analysis regarding technology. So there's, for example, a client says that they're interested in this particular technology and they want to understand how it's going to be leveraged in the future and what are the bottlenecks or issues that would prevent it from becoming disruptive. And so I would use first principles thinking to understand, how is that technology being created? What is the value that this new technology creates? What are the aspects that stop this value from being created? And then I look at the first principles thinking. And so again, get down to the truth or the lowest level. Another tool is called the fundamental psychological needs. And it was created by Professor Peter Desmet, who is a professor of experience design at Delft University in the Netherlands. And here's a picture of us together. I went to the Netherlands to get trained on his technique, and it is called the 13 Fundamental Psychological Needs, and it is something that he leverages in experience design or product design, basically in design in general. His over 30 years of research has led him to the 13 Fundamental Psychological Needs. He has come to it from a positive design perspective. He has done a tremendous amount of research on emotion, which has then led him to needs. And we're going to do some examples so you can kind of see how it flows. So here we have some of the documents he gave. So there's the needs, and in this right here, this sheet on the right-hand side, there are some pictures of chairs. And so he tried to, in one page, show how you have the different fundamental needs represented in different chairs. So let's go over the fundamental needs. There are 13. They are autonomy, beauty, comfort, community, competence, fitness, impact, morality, purpose, recognition, relatedness, security, and stimulation. Now, there's not enough time to go over each one at length. However, we're going to go over two. So just to give you an idea, this is all available online, by the way. You can just Google his name and the 13 Fundamental Psychological Needs. So here, I just want to show you this. It's just, you have the fundamental needs on the left-hand side, and then you've got their definition, and then you have their sub-needs. Each one of them has 4 sub-needs. And so let's go over one. Let's go over community. So community is one of the 13 needs. The definition he has created for community is being part of and accepted by a social group or entity that is important to you, rather than feeling you do not belong anywhere and have no social structure to rely on. So the 4 sub-needs of community are the need for social harmony, the need for affiliation, such as group identity, the need for rooting, such as in tradition or culture, the need for conformity, such as fitting in. And here are some examples so you can understand what they look like in our lives. So to have this need fulfilled, an example of that is being part of a group that you can rely on, such as family and friends. Behaving in accordance to the rules and values of your group, so for example, culture and tradition. Or identifying with a certain group, for example, a profession, a club, a country, it could be also a sports club, but identifying with a certain group. So these are some ways that the needs are fulfilled. So for this to be leveraged in a design context, and also I believe an imagination context, he uses what's called laddering. And we're going to go over an example of that he has used to explain it. So the first thing is he looks at motive. So there's a stimulus. So we're going to do motive abstraction, and we're going to go little by little. So he looks at a situation. In this case, we have somebody mowing the lawn, and that is our example. So the stimulus event is the person is mowing the lawn, and the mower is noisier than that person expected. And so there's an emotion there, and that emotion is disappointment. And I won't be able to go over emotion, but there's a whole body of work that he's done on emotion and categorizing emotion. So in this case, the mower is noisier than I expected, and I'm disappointed. If we dig further in, then we say, okay, well, what is the motive? Why does this bother you? Why are you disappointed? And then in this case, you can have an interview with somebody or try to assess without the user what it is their motive could be. So in this case, well, I want to be competent, I want my weekend chores to be relaxing, and I want my lawn mowing to be comfortable. And the noisiness is hindering him from being able to do that. And then we go another layer in, and we go into the need discovery. And so in this case, now, the emotions that people feel are not necessarily directed towards the same need in everybody. So somebody could have the same experience, but have a different need that it ties to. So in this case, it's community, which we've already discussed in the previous slide. So in this case, the noisiness makes him feel that he'll be bothering the community, and he wants social coherence in his neighborhood. He doesn't want to hinder or harm his neighborly relations, and he doesn't want to bother neighbors. And so in this sense, this emotion can be traced down to the community need. So this is an example of how you can do the analysis of that and see how to design or imagine differently a product for this need and this emotion. So now here we have another example. It is a wheelchair. It's a children's wheelchair. So here are two wheelchairs. If you could just take a look at them, try and see what you observe. So what he had his students do, the project was to design for the fundamental needs of children's wheelchair. What do children want in their wheelchair? And so his students went and interviewed children who used wheelchairs and asked them about their experience with the wheelchair and said, okay, well, what do you like about it? What do you not like about it? And some of the students who interviewed the children thought that the children were going to say that they were embarrassed by their wheelchair. But in fact, they felt empowered by their wheelchair. They loved the fact that it could take them places and that they felt autonomous and able to go around. However, the one thing that they didn't like, that they did feel shame about, was the handles, the push handles, because it made them feel that they were not autonomous, that they needed other people's help, that they were reliant on other people's help. But the wheelchair allowed them to be autonomous, but those push handles were a big signifier that they needed help, and they didn't like that. So his students worked towards a different design, and this is an example of one of the students, the design. And what they did is, if you'll notice, the push handles have been replaced with this kind of bar that is a roundabout kind of bar. It doesn't have two little handles. It's got a, let's say, half circle, so to speak, at the top. And that bar can be pushed down so people don't need to see it. So when it's needed, it can be pushed up. And then when it's not needed, it can be pushed down so nobody sees that push bar that's like kind of half a circle. And so what they did is they focused on the autonomy of the children. And that was a fundamental need that they were addressing in this redesign of the wheelchair. And it was a success with the kids. They loved it. So here's an example of imagining through the fundamental psychological needs. And in this case, it was autonomy. And I really think that when you're thinking about imagining through humanity, it just doesn't get almost any better than thinking about the 13 fundamental psychological needs. It's amazing research that gets to the core of us being humans. Another tool I find really useful for imagining through the humanity facet is cultural engagement. And what I mean by that is art, exhibits, film, theaters. You can go music, any kind of like a crafts market. Any kind of opportunity to engage with culture is very humanizing because it allows us to see the humanity of others and it being expressed in new and beautiful ways. Artists obviously are the best example of this. And here we have an example of Aya Haydar. She is an artist, and I came across her work the other year. She has an exhibit called Soulless. So soul is in the bottom of your shoe. And she specifically did an exhibit where she embroidered on the soles of shoes of migrants. And it was a way to repurpose something that was destroyed. So these are particularly the shoes that were used as they migrated from one country to another. And it wasn't hopping on a plane situation. It was a lot of hardship, illegally crossing borders and all of that. And so she's taken their shoes and asked their story, and she has embroidered their story on the bottom of the sole of the shoe. So here's an example of it. And this one in particular, this story very much touched me because there's a lot of headlines of migrants and people who are trying to flee different countries for whatever reason, whether it's climate disaster or conflict or political turmoil. And we see the statistic, but we don't know their stories, their individual stories, and we don't get to humanize them in the way that she has in her art exhibit. So because I normally take a lot of pictures when I go to exhibits, but in this case I didn't because I was too taken by the stories and particularly the story. And so I have another picture that I found where she's recreated this same embroidery so you can see it more clearly. So this story is called Orphaned, Overboard, and Baggage. And it is the story of a Syrian woman who fled Syria, and she was on a boat, a dinghy boat from Turkey to Greece, and she was continuing to make her way through Europe. She had a young baby. It was her son that she brought with her. It was just her and her baby son. And this was an illegal situation where she paid a person to traffic her and others from Turkey by boat to Greece. And it was nighttime, it was dark, and they're clearly doing something illegal, so they're trying to keep quiet, but naturally the baby is cold and tired and hungry and crying. And the trafficker was scared that the cries of the baby would reveal their position and that everybody would be compromised. And so the trafficker took the baby that was crying out of her hands and dumped it into the ocean. And the sentence that was there in the description of this story, and this is the embroidery that was on the sole of her shoe, her actual shoe. It didn't take long for the baby to quieten as he floated away. And that broke my heart because I couldn't imagine the pain, the suffering, that moment. It's so unhumanizing. It is so dehumanizing. It is just horrific, tragic. And I just kept wondering, I kept, circling back in that exhibit, back to that shoe in disbelief. Like, how could this even happen? And I thought this was an incredible way for her story to reach other people instead of this statistic, this many Syrians have fled, or it doesn't matter what country, this many people have fled from X country. It really humanizes everything that they've gone through, the risks that they've taken, and the sacrifices they've made, and the heartbreak that all of it has caused them. And this brings me to the last tool that I think is very useful for imagining through the humanity facet of imagination, and it is compassion. People ask me, like, what is compassion? So the Webster Dictionary for the word compassion says, sympathetic consciousness of others' distress together with a desire to alleviate it. And if we're going to return now to the Kodak example, so we've seen that Kodak example throughout this webinar series, and I think this is a great moment to return back to it. So in webinar 1, we had the democratized tech, where we looked at how Kodak saw themselves to be in the business of print photography excellence. And that's the technology they were interested in because they printed great pictures and they were interested in improving that. So when the digital camera came along, they didn't see that as part of their core business. And it's not just the digital camera, all the technologies that come along. So, and then what it did is it democratized taking pictures. You no longer needed film, you no longer needed Kodak, you could just take a picture on your phone and have it in your pocket. But in essence, instead of seeing themselves as being in the business of print photography, they should have seen themselves as being in the business of memory preservation. Again, this is the second principle of the book, that properly defining what you're in the business of doing can open or close the imagination aperture and the ability to thrive through disruption. So then I revisited this Kodak example again, but this time through the identity facet of imagination. So their identity, through the marketing, they already had described it really well. From a business perspective, they didn't appreciate what their identity was in terms of how their marketing was expressing it and the way that people understood it. So the Kodak moment was a moment where you take this like picture perfect moment, this memory that you're looking to capture. It's a Kodak moment. And they already knew that. And so I shared this ad from the 60s where it says, moments like this won't wait for dad. And the mom here quickly grabs the camera to take a picture of her kid's birthday party. And their core business, again, I reiterate, is memory preservation. But if they saw themselves as their identity, their corporate identity as the business of memory preservation, that's what they were offering, that's their value proposition, it would have been different. But let's revisit this same example through the lens of humanity. So we looked at it through the lens of identity. So and the lens of democratized tech. So democratized tech, they didn't appreciate that cam footage or pictures and video was being democratized with a digital camera. And then two, we looked at identity, that were not able to reimagine their own identity outside of print photography. Now let's look at it through the humanity lens. Through the humanity lens, you start to see the humans that are involved. The humans who are trying to capture their baby's first steps, the day that they committed to their loved one for the rest of their lives, their romantic partner, or the many people in their family, all the generations, their grandparents themselves, their kids, etc. All of these people who mean something to them. This is what they were trying to capture, their love. They captured that through print photography in the past, but then they captured that through digital, and now we're going to have new means to capture all these kinds of things. But basically, if they looked at it through the humanity lens, they would have seen the big responsibility they had to help people preserve the memories that they hold dearest. So even think about people who've passed away and how much we hold on to those pictures, those few videos we have of them, and replay them to see them again, because we can't see them ever again in our lifetime, but we can through those videos. And so if we look at it through the humanity lens, we understand that this is not about print photography. This is really about human emotion, love, and the things that we hold dear. So this is an example, again, of using Kodak, but now through the humanity lens. So what kind of tools can we use to exercise our compassion muscle? I think there are three. One is common humanity, active listening, and kindness. I think that these can help amp up our compassion. So for common humanity, basically understanding that we are all human and struggle with similar problems, or recognizing and acknowledging that. For active listening, it's listening with interest and curiosity, and with the intention to understand other people. And then kindness is the quality of being friendly, generous, and considerate. So here we have the imagination facet canvas, which I think you can just couple with whatever other business canvases that you like, or use alone. And here we have the questions for the humanity facet of imagination that you can apply to your business, your product, your service. And so for the humanity one, there's three questions. What are the first principles relevant to your value proposition? Two, how have you engaged with the humanity aspects of your value proposition? And so I gave an example of Kodak and how they didn't engage fully with the humanity aspects of their value proposition. Again, it was never about the paper, the prints. It was about the memories that people hold dear, that they were hoping to have with them. And then how have you leaned into humanity in your value proposition? Maybe you already have. How? Articulate that. So that concludes this chapter. The song that I made with AI for this chapter is called Human Touch We Crave. As with all the others, I used a prompt that summarizes the chapter, basically like one sentence, and you can find all of those details in the back of the book in the appendix, and you can listen to this song. And if you'd like to work together, or for me to speak at an event or anything, just reach out. Here is my contact information. Next chapter is the fourth and final facet of imagination. It is dreams. And in this Defiant Dreams chapter, we are going to talk about how imagination can be really boosted with dreams and why it's the most powerful facet of imagination. There's going to be two case studies, one about Jeff Bezos's childhood dream, another one about Dreamscape Immersive, which is a immersive company. It's a virtual reality immersive company. And then the tools are granting permission to dream, dream discovery, and high fidelity visualization. And I really do think that this is potentially the hardest form of imagination. And it's maybe counterintuitive because dreaming, and this is not the dreams that you dream at night. This is, dreaming, hoping, imagining, desiring. But a lot of times we stop ourselves from even imagining and dreaming something for ourselves that is big and bold in the future. And so I hope you will join for that webinar. Thank you for chiming in.